Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Animas Corporation, providing insulin delivery products for people living with diabetes and part of the One Touch family. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes with the world's first continuous glucose monitoring system that sends glucose readings directly to your compatible smart device. Live life on your own terms with Dexcom. Hi, it's Stacey. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. I am not a doctor. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, a new campaign to stop a dangerous problem, DKA before a diabetes diagnosis, educating about the signs and symptoms in a new campaign involving pediatricians.
When you look at the rate of diagnosis of DKA in some of the European countries where it's as low as 10% versus the developing countries, which is as high as 80%, you know it's an awareness problem.
Tom Scher is with Beyond Type 1. We'll talk about their new multi-state campaign, how doctors are responding to it, and what DKA actually is. Plus, if you're a mom with Type 1, we need your help. I'll tell you about a new research project. It all starts now on Diabetes Connections. Welcome to another week of the podcast. So glad to have you along. Let's hope winter is behind us. It's been so cold, and I know there's been so much snow across much of the country. We live in the South. We got about 5 seconds of snow last week, but it's been so cold here that my son actually wore long pants to school all last week, which is incredible. That kid wears shorts when it gets down to 35, so, when it's under that, he's wearing pants. That's pretty cold stuff. I am so glad you are here for another week of Diabetes Connections. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes through stories of connections, talking to incredible people who are living with type 1, doing amazing things. We also talk to the healthcare companies and the people behind the newest technology, as well as those of us who are never going to drive on a NASCAR track or play pro football, but are just trying to do the best we can day to day with diabetes. Last week, I was telling you about a couple of I want to call them crazy guys, but that's not really fair. A couple of amazing athletes, and they really are. Talking about Charlie Benja, who recently completed the Iditarod, and Roddy Riddle, who was competing in the 6633 Arctic Ultra for the second time. So quick update, although you may have heard already, and I will link this up at diabetes-connections.com. So congrats to Charlie Benja, who safely finishes the Iditarod. I believe he finished in something like 46th place, but the times at that level weren't that far apart. Finishing it is just absolutely incredible with type 1 diabetes or without. And Roddy Riddle crossed the finish line second in the 6633, which is a 350-mile race around the Arctic, and I describe it as the Iditarod, but you're the dog because you're pulling your own sled that has all your supplies on it. I can't wait to talk to Roddy. He said he would be happy to come on maybe a couple of weeks after the race was finished. We talked last year before he started the Arctic Ultra, and unfortunately last year he had to withdraw, so he called this his unfinished business, and man, did he make the most of it. That is so brutal. I mean, they're racing, walking, running, in the Arctic. It's nuts, but wow, good for him. Both of those guys, just incredible accomplishments. And here I am complaining about being cold. I think when Roddy crossed the finish line, the guy was saying the camera kept freezing because it was minus 36. And, I'm cold because it's positive 36. Well, to each our own. So that's how he's contributing to the cause. I am contributing by going to a conference that I've never been to before. Wanted to tell you about this. This is happening in April. It is the Healthy Voices Conference, and it's a conference for online advocates from across different health conditions. I'm excited about this one. It's not just diabetes people. It's sponsored by Janssen Pharmaceuticals, which is a Johnson & Johnson company. And basically, they want to help you, they say on the website, provide valuable content, tips to further engage and grow your audience, thought-provoking conversation, and networking opportunities for online health advocates. So when I applied for this, I said, I'm looking for information to bring back to my audience. I am really happy with the way I'm engaging and growing my audience as you listen. I'm not looking to go to a conference and pick up, ways to get more followers, but I am looking for ways to empower you as you listen to advocate more for type 1 if that's what you're interested in, or connect more with people in your community. So I'm excited to see what this is all about. I will keep you posted. They are paying for the whole shebang. They pay for the travel and the hotel. So lots of disclosures to share, and I'll be doing that. But it should be fun. I'm excited also to meet people from, different advocacy groups and not just from diabetes. It'll be interesting to see what we can learn from them. Want to tell you about Animas, our sponsor. Choosing an insulin pump is an important decision. I feel really fortunate that our certified diabetes educator really worked with us. She actually did educate us about all of our options. And she listened to what we wanted in an insulin pump. And after nearly 10 years with Animas, I know it was the right decision. Benny, my son, was 2 when we started with Animas. He is now 12. We continue to be impressed with everything, including the stellar customer service. And that's why I'm so glad to be able to tell you about our experience and why I would really urge you to learn more about Animas insulin pumps. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Animas, part of the One Touch family logo. So a while back, we had Anna Florine on the podcast. She's with Glue, and that's spelled G-L-U. And she shared her story about trying out one of the artificial pancreas setups, which is just amazing. But she also talked about Glue. She explained what it is. It's sort of like a Facebook for people with diabetes. But the responses that they get are used in real research. They do polls. They do a lot of good stuff. It's a place to kind of go and talk about your experiences in a way that a lot of us do on Facebook right now. Oh, I didn't get any sleep last night, or oh, I can't believe this happened, or great day today. And it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it feels good and friends see it. But on Glue, they really do use those responses in a way that's very useful. And right now, they need help researching pregnancy and type 1. So if you are a mom with type 1, please go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the helpful links for this episode. Every episode has helpful links at diabetes-connections.com. So if you want to learn more about whatever I talk about in the episode, it's right there. And it'll take you right to the survey. It won't take you very long to do. They are really looking to get more research done. And Anna says this is a very simple survey. I didn't take it because I'm a mom of a type 1. I'm not a mom with type 1. And that's a different survey altogether. By the way, I should mention too, since I talked about Anna being on the podcast, you know about the search option I have, right? I mean, I have more than 95 episodes now. And if you want to find something, it shouldn't be hard to search for it. So all you need to do is go to diabetes-connections.com. This is good on mobile or desktop. And the upper right-hand corner, there is a search box. Type in Glue or Anna or Disney or Guide Dogs or Victor Garber, whatever keyword you can think of. And hopefully an episode will pop up. And if you're looking for the specific episode, it should be pretty easy to find. So I just want to make sure to mention the search box if you're not aware of that already. My interview with Tom Scher with Beyond Type 1 coming up in just one moment. Want to tell you about Dexcom, though, our other terrific sponsor. We started using the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system 3 years ago when Benny had just turned 9, and it was a whole new world. The Dexcom CGM system changed the way we looked at his type 1 diabetes. When you can see and track glucose levels on a screen, it really is incredible, especially if you relied only on finger sticks for a long time, like we did. It becomes so much easier to spot trends and head off extreme highs and lows. The Dexcom G5 Mobile Continuous Glucose Monitoring System is the first FDA-approved device to let you make treatment decisions without pricking your finger. CGM-based treatment requires finger sticks for calibration, may result in hypoglycemia if calibration not performed or symptoms expectations do not match CGM readings. For more information, go to Dexcom.com. My guest today is Tom Scher. He is the COO, the Chief Operating Officer with Beyond Type 1. And we are going to talk about their terrific and very important campaign to raise awareness of DKA. I have heard that term. I've read that term. I don't see it written out or explained that much. So let's just talk about that before we jump in. DKA is diabetic ketoacidosis. And diabetic ketoacidosis is a serious complication that occurs when your body produces high level of blood acids called ketones. So without enough insulin, the body begins to break down fat as fuel. And the process of that breakdown produces a buildup of acids in the bloodstream called ketones. Ketones are acid, eventually leading to diabetic ketoacidosis if untreated. I have heard it said, and to me, this is a good analogy, it helps me visualize it, that having ketones is like battery acid in your blood. And I know that's a horrible thing to think about, but when we say the word ketones, it's kind of abstract. When you think about it as a buildup of acids, it's a little easier to understand why it's so dangerous. And I'll link up a lot more information at diabetes-connections.com. But here's the problem. You probably were nodding. You know what DKA is, even if you didn't even know the whole definition and what it stood for. But you know what DKA is because you're in the diabetes world, right? That's one of the things we get educated on once we're in. But what about when you're not in yet, when you don't know? And that's the really big danger. When people in the United States are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, 30 to 40% of them are already in DKA, which means their lives are in danger. I'm really thankful Benny never got that far in, but we were very lucky, and I know that. Over the years, you may have heard about a few tragedies. I mean, we talk about these briefly in the interview with Tom Scher. Casey Terry, Kisses for Casey, that was I hesitate to call it a campaign, but that was someone that we heard quite a lot about a few years ago. Regan Oxendine here in North Carolina, who sparked legislation actually in this state. And of course, there are many more adults and children whose names we don't know who have died from DKA before they got a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. It's a real problem, and it's something we can do something about. So here's my interview with Tom Scher from Beyond Type 1. Tom Scher, thank you so much for joining me today. This is such an important topic. Thanks for spending some time to tell us more about what you're doing.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, how did Beyond Type 1 get involved with trying to do something about DKA? There's so much that you all do. This seems, really nitty-gritty medical stuff. Why was this a priority?
DKA is a huge problem. So we were sitting in the office one day, and our CEO, Sarah Lucas, she came in and she was, to be honest, very emotional about one of the more high-profile DKA deaths, and just felt like this was such a solvable problem. And that was back in our early days. We had just gotten our 501c3. We certainly did not have the network to do the campaign like it looks now. So we basically, created a poster, and that poster got sent around. We did a social post, and it turned out that the traction on that was just tremendous. And that sat with us for a long, long time until fast forward about a year, and we started working on what became this campaign. But over the course of that year, we knew we wanted to do something. Frankly, we knew we needed to do something. We just weren't quite sure what the in was. And then, to be honest, in a very Beyond Type 1 fashion, we stumbled upon a social media post from Michelle Berman and Debbie Healy out of Pennsylvania talking about trying to bring a poster campaign into their chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And that led to a preliminary meeting and a preliminary discussion between the group of us. And that was sort of the first stage of what eventually became this campaign.
Wow. So it was really a question of people trying to do something similar and just needing to reach out together.
Exactly. The original idea was, how do we get resources into these pediatricians' offices? And, eventually this has become a campaign that's not just about getting material into the hands of pediatricians and their staffs. It's a campaign about getting those materials then available to all of the people visiting those offices. But it really did start as this idea that DKA is a completely solvable problem. It's an awareness problem. And we know that if we can educate on the signs and symptoms, frankly, we can eliminate DKA.
All right, so let's back up. Diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA, what we're talking about here, is something that once you're in the diabetes world, My son was diagnosed 10 years ago. We're told, you want to look out for this. This can happen during illness. This can happen during dehydration. But before diagnosis, when we all have no idea why our kids or us as an adult, why, the thirst, the urination, why we don't know why that's going on, that's what you're talking about, right? This is what can happen when people say, oh, it's just the flu, or go home and wait it out, things like that.
So I think for me, the bit of this story that really resonated was I was talking with somebody in the community, and they were telling me this terrible story. And it ended up working out okay, and their child survived. But frankly, luckily, and a number of children have not been so lucky. And the story basically went that there was excessive thirst, and there was, frequent urination. There were all of those common early stage symptoms. And everybody chalked it up to growth spurt because, frankly, when you're dealing with a 10-year-old who has excessive thirst and is kind of tired, you don't really think twice about it. And then that child ended up with stomach flu symptoms. They went to their school nurse. They got sent home with the stomach flu. They went to the hospital. They got sent home from the hospital. They wound up back at the hospital. And it was at that point that they finally did a urine test. And at that point, when somebody is showing those kinds of signs, the stomach flu signs, you're already really getting into stages of DKA that are extraordinarily dangerous. And so we have to do a better job educating that not only are there signs and symptoms tied to early stage type 1 diagnoses, but there's also those stomach flu symptoms that if people are just a little bit more aware of, all it takes is a simple blood or urine test.
It's absolutely incredible. And when you think about those high profile and such sad cases that, as you said earlier on, this could be preventable. As you listen, you may be familiar with, Kisses for Casey. Casey was a little girl who lost her life to DKA. And Regan here in North Carolina, where I am, another very small, a toddler who lost her life. And there are so many more, unfortunately. But in North Carolina, Regan's rule, I believe, was the first, any kind of legislation, even though it got a little bit watered down, to discuss this and address this. It was urging pediatricians to do education. What was the legislation in Pennsylvania? Was that a little stronger?
So first off, on the Regan's rule side, I want to say, tremendous to some extent. I know it did get watered down to a certain extent, but the idea of getting legislation through that even addresses this at some level is a huge win. And I commend everybody that was part of that fight. And I've spoken with most of them. We're about to launch in North Carolina. We're working our way through there and have an approval. And we're doing custom assets to make sure that Regan's rule is a part of that campaign because we're such big fans of Regan's rule and what it means. In Pennsylvania, there really wasn't legislation. There had been discussion about legislation at one point or another, but the reality of the status there was we had a chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics that was extraordinarily willing to say, okay, so you want to put resources into the pediatricians' offices. What do those resources look like? Can we work with you on them? Can we find a place that we feel good about these resources? Can we co-brand them? And that I did that one meeting with their executive director, as well as Michelle Berman and Debbie Healy, who are national parent liaisons, but also are in Pennsylvania and were part of the birth of this campaign. And the three of us plus the executive director in Pennsylvania sat down and really structured what then became a campaign that we've rolled out nationwide.
Tell me about the campaign, because you mentioned it briefly. It's newsletters, online information, PSAs. But if I'm somebody who's bringing my kid to a pediatrician, I've never heard of diabetes, except in the movies or something, or Wilford Brimley. I don't know anything about diabetes. And I got my kid who's got, strep throat. What would I see, or how would that benefit me?
Sure. So in basically every pediatrician's office that is a part of the AAP chapter, which is close to all pediatricians in the state, are getting a physical packet. And inside of that packet is a number of warning signs posters, a number of what we call the parent handout, which is an easier to photocopy handout that has stories from parents talking about what DKA is and talking about their diagnosis, and sort of it crams a lot more information than what a warning signs poster does that can be given as a handout. Then there are larger posters that are sort of, they're made of low-tack vinyl. You basically can stick them on things in the offices. And then there's additional assets for the pediatricians, things like survey cards, ways that we can improve. So basically it's print material for those offices, as well as an endorsement letter from the state, from a number of high-profile endocrinologists, from people in the state that are advocates, explaining the campaign and why the campaign matters. That then leads pediatricians' offices to do everything from take Victor Garber's audio that we've crafted for on-hold wait times when you call your pediatrician's offices, which there's a 15-second and a 30-second clip of Victor Garber explaining that it may not just be the flu. That's pretty wonderful, and we're so lucky to have worked with him and to keep working with him.
And we do have a clip. In fact, we have the whole 15-second on-hold message from Victor Garber. Here it is.
This is Victor Garber. Sometimes the stomach flu is just the stomach flu, but sometimes it can hide something more. Ask your doctor about the warning signs for type 1 diabetes.
As Tom said, there's a longer version of that as well. More information about how you can hear it and download it at diabetes-connections.com.
So effectively, if you're a parent and you're showing up at your pediatrician's office, you have no idea what DKA is. The idea is, let's just get those signs and symptoms in front of those parents a few more times, if any amount, because we don't think that they are getting in front of them enough. Similarly, let's get them in front of their pediatricians as a reminder to their pediatricians and their nurses about what those signs and symptoms are, because we all know this from all of the other campaigns, right? When you think about Lyme disease, the thing that immediately triggers in everybody's head is tick, right? Did I get a tick bite?
Right.
And that's because of years of work of saying, if you get a tick bite, go see a doctor, Lyme disease. Yeah. And the other version of this too that we always talk about is when you think about what you see when you're at a public pool or at a hotel pool, and there's always the sign about CPR and sort of what to do in the event of somebody struggling inside of the water, that sign is a federally mandated sign. But everybody knows it. Everybody knows it's there. Everyone knows what to look for. If we can get something like the warning signs poster into every pediatrician's office, and then eventually every school, we can sort of target what is both the medical side, the parent side, the schools and school nurses. Suddenly you're talking about an asset that's just part of consciousness, which is the ultimate goal. And I know that sounds lofty, but at the end of the day, when you look at the rate of diagnosis of DKA in some of the European countries where it's as low as 10%, versus the developing countries, which is as high as 80%, you know it's an awareness problem. The U.S. seems to be somewhere in that 30 to 45% range, depending on which study you look at, and we can do better.
Yeah, that seems awfully high. Wow.
It is. I'm with you. And there's a study that's about to come out that confirms that, I believe at 42%, that we that I've seen the abstract for, and that confirms what we've seen from our community. Every time we post an informal survey of our community, we hear stories about DKA that are in the 40% or so are diagnosed in a state of DKA.
What has been the reaction from the pediatricians in Pennsylvania or wherever the posters have gone up?
Sure. So we're now in 6 states
and
about to do 3 more, with the goal of doing all of them in 2017. But the reaction from the pediatricians has actually been, it's been inspiring to me. I will say at first I thought that we might get not necessarily pushback, but I thought that there was a chance that, more mailings, more things to do in a pediatrician's office.
And I'm going to interrupt you because here's my prediction. I would think they would say, there are so many things that it could be. Why am I bothering with type 1? I mean, I know why, but that's what I would imagine. Like the pediatricians there's so much stuff that they're dealing with these kids that I would see one or two of them saying, why this? And then you have to explain it. But it sounds like that's not how it went.
No, it's really not. So I can tell you I didn't have a single response. So we include a survey card as part of this, and they can fill that out digitally. They can send it back to us, and we haven't had a single response that's been the equivalent of why this. In fact, one of the first response cards that I got was from a pediatrician in Pennsylvania saying, we have somebody with type 1 on our office staff. But even then, this was a great reminder to have a conversation with our whole team. I would assume we're in the group, the note read something like, I assume we're in the group of people who actually know the signs and symptoms. But even then, it was worth doing a little bit of an in-service. The response overall has been that parents obviously are unaware of this, that there is stigma that this is inherently combating, the idea that we talk about what it's mistaken for, that it's in pediatricians' offices, obviously combats the stigma tied to type 1 versus type 2 and diabetes at large. So I think, to be honest, I think we've rolled out a really easy campaign that is easy to digest and easy to participate in. And overall, the pediatricians have received it warmly.
Any response from patients? Has anybody kind of raised their hand and said, thank you for putting that in there. It really helped me.
So one of the things that we do see every now and then is people in the community will go end up in their pediatricians' offices and they'll see the poster up. And those are some of my favorite social media posts that I see. And it's just because that means it's working, right? That means they're there, they're visible. Somebody is actually seeing them. And if our community is seeing them, and obviously they don't necessarily know to even be looking for them, but they recognize them when they see them, then I just think about the millions of people across what is now around 15,000 pediatricians' offices that have these resources. I think about all of the people every day that are seeing those signs. And frankly, when you're in a pediatrician's office, you're dealing with either a well check visit or your child is sick. You don't want to be sitting there and reading brochures, and that's just the reality of it. But when you're sitting there and you're waiting for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or an hour for your pediatrician to come in or for the nurse to come in, and there's a poster on the wall that's easy to digest and doesn't feel like we're hitting you over the head with a ton of medical information, then the response to that has been, thank you, I now understand this. And I come from somewhat of a PR background. There's always that mentality of let's get something in front of somebody's eyes over and over and over again. It takes 6 or 8 times before it really sticks. If I can get the warning signs in front of somebody 1 or 2 more times because we got them to them in their pediatrician's offices, then we're on a path to people who have no idea what type 1 diabetes is being able to recognize the signs and symptoms themselves.
Yep, absolutely. Let's talk about you for a minute. From a PR background, you don't have type 1 yourself. You don't have anybody in your family or immediate family, but you started at Beyond Type 1. You're the COO there. What brought you to Beyond Type 1? Why do this kind of work?
So it's a great little story. So I was working in PR when Mary Lucas, who's Sarah Lucas's daughter and our community manager at Beyond Type 1, Mary was interning for me as before she went to Parsons for fashion design school. And I was running this little PR firm that was focused sort of on the fashion industry. And we had a big event that Mary was going to show her clothes in. And so I came to know Sarah through that. And this was years ago. And I eventually sort of spun that down and moved into the tech space and did marketing and ops in the tech space. And I was there for a decent number of years. And I stayed in touch with Sarah. And every now and then I would see her and her husband, and I would see their family. And we just sort of kept in contact. And there was this day when, and now I'm thinking about the timeline, it had to have been in May of 2015, where I was in a Starbucks and I saw Sarah Lucas walk in. It feels like I'm about to tell you a romance story. And Sarah walked in and I sent her a text message basically saying, did I just see Sarah Lucas walk into the Starbucks? Also, your sunglasses, they look so chic. And Sarah spun around and saw me, and she picked up her coffee and sat down, and her and I had this conversation about this nonprofit that she was trying to get up off the ground. And at that point, there was no 501c3. It hadn't really been announced. There was a website, and that was sort of that. And we talked about me and my career goals, and that was sort of the end of that day. And then about maybe 2 days later, Sarah and I were both in LA. She had just done the first one of what became multiple, but she had just done a meeting with Nick Jonas about building out Beyond Type 1 and sort of what it could look like. And I got a phone call from Sarah that night. It was the middle of the night that basically said, I want you to come run operations for Beyond Type 1 for me. We're going to announce it's going to be huge. And if anything, come on for 3 months. I need somebody with a tech background that we've worked with before. Just come on board for a little while. And I basically said, give me a little bit of time. Give me until Monday. And Sarah said, it said something like, oh, come on, you know you want to do it. And I basically said, yeah, I do want to do it. I'm in. I'll happily work with you for 3 months and try to get this thing up off the ground. And I had never really done nonprofit work before, but and to be honest, the only extent of Type 1 awareness I knew was from Mary. And even when Mary was my intern, I don't think I even knew she had Type 1, which still is a sticking point that I'm more than happy to come back to because that blows my mind.
Yeah, let's come back to that because I have one of those stories too.
Yeah, exactly. So I wound up at Beyond Type 1, and about a month in, I had fallen in love with the work that I was doing. I felt like we were changing what it meant to have a chronic illness. I could see the path that Beyond Type 1 was on, and it has been a whirlwind of close to 2 years now, and I have loved every minute of it, and I find it humbling and inspiring, and I'm so proud to be a part of what Beyond Type 1 is doing. So that's my sort of story of falling into Beyond Type 1 via a Starbucks one day with Sarah Lucas.
Hey, that's how those things go, right? You write an idea on the back of a cocktail napkin sometimes, or you just run into the right person at the right moment.
It's spot on.
You never know. But let's go back to that because, it's interesting when you meet an adult, certainly with Type 1, and even some teenagers, if they don't really want to share, or if there's really, if there's not much to make a big deal about, quite often you don't even know. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that I dated a guy, right out of college, pretty much, who had Type 1 diabetes, and he really never wanted to talk about it. I knew he had it because he used injections, and but it was no big deal, and I knew nothing. And we're still friendly, one of those relationships that ends and everybody goes, but we still keep in touch. We have an alumni group. And when my son was diagnosed, I reached out to him, and he told me more than I had ever even realized was going on. It was just amazing to me, knowing how much my son has to do, that this young adult handled all of this, and he's much more open now, but he just didn't want to be, and how hard that was. So I doubt you have a similar story, because I know Mary is more open, but it is amazing how sometimes you just don't know.
I think Mary is significantly more open now than perhaps what she was then. I think the rise of frankly, of organizations like Beyond Type 1 have really empowered a lot of people to embrace Type 1 as part of who they are. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that that's a great thing. I think that the more that people can embrace what is at the end of the day a chronic illness, but understand that comes with, at least to a certain extent, silver linings, which is this incredible community and this world that they're thrust in of support and a piece of who they are, right? Mm-hmm. That I don't think people should necessarily want to hide that. And I think that Mary, at least when she was in high school, probably wasn't trying to hide it, but it just wasn't a point of discussion. But I think these days, I know she was very, very inspired by the Sierra Sanderson Show Us Your Pump campaign. And that meant a lot to her, to be a high school girl able to go to the beach and actually wear a pump. And I think more and more I see that all the time with teenage girls who aren't scared of that, and nor should they be. That's part of how they are managing their disease. It's part of who they are. And I think that that's wonderful. And I think that to the extent that organizations can get out there and role model that, look, you can not only live but thrive with type 1 diabetes, and you don't need to hide it, and it doesn't need to be something that is an injection done under the table in hiding, but it's something that you can actually embrace. That's a win. That's a win for people living with this disease.
It really is. And getting back to the campaign that you all are working on, when you say you're expanding to other states, and selfishly I'd like to talk more about North Carolina, but do you need help? Do you need grassroots help in those states, or is it just a matter of we could call our pediatrician and say, is this coming? Anything that people can do as they listen?
Absolutely. So first off, to the extent that, so the list of states that we are currently in is Pennsylvania, Texas, New Jersey, Delaware, Ohio, and Massachusetts. And we are working on launching and sort of already have approval in North Carolina as well, and Florida. And so those sort of 8 states are what we've started with. We have a number of other states that are in progress. To the extent that I did not just list your state and you feel like you want to help us bring this to your state, honestly, just an email to hello@beyondtype1.org with who you are and that you were interested in bringing this campaign to your state would be a huge win. The way that it works is we have 2 national parent liaisons, Michelle Berman and Debbie Healy, and we have our team. And then basically our team and our national parent liaisons work with parent liaisons inside of the state to coordinate a meeting with that chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, because each chapter sort of has their own approval process, and they work to set up a meeting and present the campaign. And then from there, that campaign can effectively go live. Beyond Type 1 does the bulk of heavy lifting in terms of finalizing of assets and printing. But to be honest, we also then need people on the ground to help with packaging of these envelopes. And it's a true grassroots campaign in a lot of sense. And so there's some great photos of Carolyn Borden in Texas, who brought in something in the realm of 20 volunteers who she amassed to help package what was thousands of these envelopes and packages and then get them out inside of Texas. And that's sort of our dream. And now she's been intimately involved along with her co-parent liaison, Amy Josephy. And the 2 of them have not only brought it into the AAP's list, but they've also brought the same campaign materials into a number of other offices. And they've got the posters posted in dentists' offices. Oh, wow. And they've reached out to local press, and it's started to creep into the schools. And now we're starting to put those resources into schools and doing print runs for the schools. So the ideal parent liaisons are people who really want to help lead the charge of DKA awareness in their state. And that doesn't mean from a legislative end. It purely means from this grassroots printed campaign side, which we think has tremendous effect.
Well, when you come to North Carolina, let us know. Let me know. We'll get the word out. I'd love to have, some help or, some media attention. That would be fantastic. But, I'm curious too. We hear sometimes that when you reach out to organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but that was individuals. I'm curious, as an organization, what was their response? Because we sometimes hear that, we're addressing that in our own way, or thank you, we'll look into this. It sounds like you had great success, but what was the Academy's response to all this? Was it really hard to go through the bureaucracy, for lack of a better word?
They've been wonderful. The American Academy of Pediatrics, so we work with different chapters, and largely a state is the equivalent of a chapter, but not in every case. We work with the different chapters, and they have just been so incredibly willing to work with us on this campaign. And frankly, without them, we wouldn't have access to the pediatricians, and the campaign wouldn't be successful, and it wouldn't come with their endorsement. And so what they have done by allowing us to bring this campaign into pediatricians' offices has just been tremendous. So they have been really easy to work with. It has not been red tape, to the extent that they weighed in early on the actual materials and the best way to craft these materials to create an effective campaign using their expertise. That was tremendously valuable. But to be honest, they've just made it really easy. And now that has spread around, I think, from chapter to chapter, because you have different chapter presidents and executive directors talking to other chapters and executive directors saying, we rolled out this amazing DKA awareness campaign tied to type 1 diabetes. You should consider rolling it out. If they haven't contacted you already, I'm sure they're about to be knocking on your door.
But that's great to hear, because I as unimaginably devastating it must be for a parent or a loved one to lose a child to type 1 diabetes, it's got to weigh on a doctor in a horrible way as well. Nobody wants to miss this.
I think that that's certainly true. And our campaign is not geared towards a formal education for the pediatricians, right? It's meant to leverage the pediatricians and all of the people coming into their offices. And if that's a good reminder of the warning signs for a pediatrician, that's outstanding. But it's meant to then get those resources up and get them in front of the parents. That said, I hear you. And I think that to the extent any type of misdiagnosis and any type of missed diagnosis by anyone who would have seen someone in a state of DKA obviously is a haunting reality, and that's no one's fault. It's an awareness problem. And so I think that the fact that they've been as receptive as they have, it's a really good reminder of, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to solve problems. And so are they. And the American Academy of Pediatrics gets that, and they understand that, if we can bring educational resources into pediatricians' offices, that's a win for the people in those offices, all of the people. And so I will say that I think that the pediatricians have been really receptive, the AAP chapters have been really receptive, and the parents on the back end have been extraordinarily grateful. I do think, though, that it is very easy to envision a more combative world where you want to take a campaign in and it's because you're blaming pediatricians for what has gone on. But that's not necessarily productive in any way, right? It's very easy to assign blame to a school nurse or to a teacher who missed the frequent urination, or to the pediatrician who thought it looked like the stomach flu, or to the parent who skipped over that page of whichever medical book it was that they were reading. But that's just not helping solve any of these problems. And so to the extent that we can all sort of put that in a box and close the box and think, okay, without any of that on the table, what do we need to do in order to be effective in educating people moving forward? That's led us to a really happy place where I think all of those parties can work together.
That's fantastic. You've said it so well, because it isn't about blame. It's about education, and it's about making the situation better. Tom, thank you so much for joining me. I love this. This is absolutely incredible that you've been able to accomplish so much in so little time. I mean, Beyond Type 1 is only 2 years old anyway, and this campaign hasn't been going on for very long. So keep us posted. Let me know how it goes. And, as you listen, we will link up all the information at diabetes-connections.com if you're interested in helping out. Tom, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacey. It's been a pleasure.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Beyond Type 1's campaign, how you can get it to your town, and you can listen to more of Victor Garber if you want to at diabetes-connections.com. And by the way, if you don't know, I interviewed him January of this year. You can just go back a couple of episodes and listen to Victor Garber talk about being famous with Type 1. You can also search that up on the website in the search box I was talking about earlier. I do want to mention one thing about DKA with Type 1 diabetes. Once you already know that you or your child has Type 1, It is often confused with large ketones or even medium ketones. And I'm gonna seriously say I am not a doctor. Definitely talk to your endocrinologist about any decisions you make when you or your child develop ketones of any size. But I have seen on Facebook time and time again people who post the picture of either the ketone strip with the color or the number in the blood ketone meter and say, should I go to the hospital? Is this DKA? And that is something, again, you've got to talk to your endo about. But large ketones are not DKA. There's a lot of fear out there. And rightfully so. Large ketones are serious business. I call my endo anytime we have medium ketones because we're very fortunate. It's rare. And Benny's never had, where's the knock wood? He's never had large ketones. And I check when we have high blood sugars and when we have illness. But I'm telling you, it's the kind of thing that does get pretty easily confused. So if you're not already aware of what to do, ask your endo. What do I do if my kid has medium ketones or small ketones? Should he be going to recess? Everybody's different. There are different guidelines for exercise. This is not a show. I probably shouldn't even be talking about it in this much detail here at the end. But I did want to get that out there because while the topic here isn't DKA during type 1, we're talking about trying to save lives before the diagnosis comes through. I do think if you're not more familiar about what to do with type 1, it's worth a call to your endo or talking about it at your next visit to have a plan in place when or if they pop up so that you're not panicking and going to the hospital when you don't have to, and that you're not staying home and underreacting when you should be doing more. Does that make sense? Okay. Links to everything we talked about, the amazing guys up in the Arctic in Alaska doing the Iditarod, also finishing the 6633 Arctic Ultra, the GLUE pregnancy survey. If you are a mom with type 1, please go ahead and take that. And of course, all the information on DKA, including Beyond Type 1's wonderful campaign. Hey, if you like this episode, if you like the show, please share it with somebody touched by type 1. You can go ahead and subscribe on whatever podcast app you are listening to and sign up for the newsletter, which goes out once a week. It also goes out when there's a bonus episode. I did a bonus episode recently with NASCAR driver Ryan Reed. Ryan is on the Xfinity circuit and he won in Daytona. It was very exciting, opening race of the Xfinity circuit, and he has type 1. He just marked 6 years with it. So if you want to make sure to stay in the know about the bonus episodes and get the link of the week, which is something I don't talk about on the show. It's something that is, better read than heard about usually or seen, or it's a sign up for something else. So to get that, you've got to sign up for the newsletter. Listen, I know your time is valuable. I so appreciate you spending some of it with me. Thanks so much for listening. I am Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.